when they switched off. Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay. But primarily, your father would be the one seen in the Dodge Dakota, correct?
correct.
Okay. Okay. Now, I want to talk about the summer of 2019 and in regards to raccoons. What do you recall about that summer in regards to raccoons?
That summer, um, I was testing out a new tent and I out in the backfield and I heard a rustling and I went out and I looked up into the tree and there was a raccoon there. And so I ran inside and I told my dad, there's a raccoon. And it was very close to where our rabbits were being kept. And so I told him and we went out. He grabbed the shotgun and he shot the raccoon.
And was that in the evening? Was that during the day? When was that?
It was about 10 at night.
Okay, so an evening.
Yeah.
Okay. Was it exclusive that you would only see raccoons at night, or were there occasions when you would see them in the morning or the afternoon?
I saw them at night, except for when we had trapped them.
Okay. And you had trapped them during the day
Hmm.
when they were raiding what were they raiding?
The rabbit hutch, or it was a rabbit pen. We had set up a fence.
Okay. So they would come in during the day to go after your rabbit food or rabbits?
The food, and we were worried they would go after the rabbits eventually too.
Okay. Did you have an occasion to catch other raccoons during the summer of 2019?
We did.
How many other raccoons did you catch during the summer of 2019?
It was 3 or 4, if I remember.
And do you have a recollection of approximately where on the property those were buried?
We typically buried them in the compost heap behind the silver shed.
Okay. Were there other animals that were buried in a different place on the property?
Yes.
And where would those other animals be buried?
Animals that were more of pets, we would bury out near a raspberry patch.
Okay. So it would be unusual for your father to put a raccoon in the raspberry patch then. Would that be fair?
Yes.
Okay. So would he typically tell your mother if he did something like that?
Yes.
Okay. Was the silver, and what did you call it? The behind the what?
Silver shed.
The silver shed, was that getting full at some point?
The shed was pretty, or you mean
The ground around the shed is where you were putting them in the compost.
um, I would think so. There was a few animals in there.
Well, more than a few, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So at some point you also set traps for the raccoons. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Who did you get the traps from?
Our neighbor, Matt Price.
Okay. And at some point, was there issues with the operation of that trap?
Sometimes they could get in and get the food without the trap activating.
Okay. Okay. Now, and when that happened, would that mean the door wouldn't close, or what would go on there?
So the door would remain open, but the food would disappear.
Okay. And was that happening throughout the summer?
It was.
Okay. And eventually, did you catch that big raccoon?
There were so many, I don't remember.
Okay. And at some
Sir.
point,
I apologize to interrupt. There's just an issue I want to bring up briefly on a sidebar here. right, thank you, counsel. The court had that quick sidebar. It was nothing to do with any question or any impropriety of a question or objection or anything like that. It was simply a matter of management of witnesses in the case. And so because the issue came up and we need to address that briefly, and given the timing, Mr. Pryor, I think it would be good to just break for lunch, then we can sort that
Okay.
out and you can continue with direct.
Okay.
So we'll go ahead and take the lunch recess. We'll take an hour. So if we can come back on just before 1 o'clock, that will be when we'll resume. Thank you.
And Mr. Daybell, our be advised not to talk about the case or meet with anybody regarding the case as well, okay?
Yeah, while you're under oath, don't discuss your testimony or talk to anybody else about how you're going to testify between now and when you return, please.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
All right, please. District Court again, it says.
All right, thank you. Please be seated. All right, we can have the jurors brought in, please. Yeah, let's have the witness return to the stand first. Thank you. You may.
President Counter for your.
Thank you. Please be seated. All right, welcome back, everyone. Like to remind everyone here in attendance, there's a courtroom conduct order in effect, and I appreciate everyone complying with that thus far today. We're on the record on CR 22-21-1623, State of Idaho versus Chad Guy Daybell. We just concluded the lunch recess, and Garth Daybell is on the stand in direct examination. If you'd like to continue with your direct, Mr. Pryor, you may at this time.
Thank you, Your Honor. You all set, Garth?
Yep.
Okay. Now, Garth, before we go forward, we had previously been talking about the raccoon in the cage. But before we go forward, how many times prior to today have we spoken together?
I think no more than 3,
Okay,
including today.
okay. If you include today, we did speak yesterday for a brief time. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did I tell you anything to say, or did I encourage you to testify a certain way?
No.
Did I give you any advice of any kind?
The only advice given was to just tell the truth.
Okay. And you're prepared to do that today?
Yes.
I want to talk about the the September 9th of 2019. Do you recall that?
I think that if I recall correctly, that's the day that I drove home.
Okay, and about what time did you get home that day?
So I got home from work about a little after 4 because that's when my contract hours ended, and so it'd take about 20 minutes to drive home, and I pulled into the back driveway.
Okay, and hold on a second. I guess I didn't cover this very well. You are currently employed as what?
I'm a 8th grade science teacher,
And where do you teach?
Madison Junior High in Rexburg.
Okay. And at the time in 2019, were you working as an 8th grade science teacher?
I was.
Okay. And did you have another job as well?
That October, I worked as a scare person at a local haunted house.
Okay. Okay. So on the date of September 9th of 2019, you had testified that you were just getting home. Is that correct?
Yes,
Did you have an occasion in that, and that was it late afternoon or evening? Do you recall?
it was late afternoon. The sun was still up.
Okay. Did you have an occasion to talk to your father?
I did. As I pulled in, he came up to me. He was in work clothes and
All right. Now hold on. When you say close, what does that mean?
yard work.
Okay.
And he sounded very excited. He said, "Hey, Garth, I killed another raccoon."
Okay. Was that the raccoon that you folks were having difficulty with that was breaking out of the cage?
I believe it was.
Okay. And did he express that to you that he finally got that raccoon?
He did.
Okay. And then at that point, did he show you where he buried that raccoon?
He showed me that it was buried behind the silver shed.
Okay. Okay. Did he ever say to you that he buried a raccoon in the pet cemetery?
Objection, Your Honor, calls for hearsay.
Sustained.
Okay. Now, are we confusing the raccoons? You know that you buried some in the silver shed. Is there possibly that some were buried in the pet cemetery?
I think, or they were all buried behind the silver shed.
Okay. Now, we talked a little bit with your sister about your mother's health issues. What concerns did you have about your mother's health?
I was concerned that she was getting tired extremely easily, that she would work extremely hard all day and then just come home and collapse.
Okay. And did you ever encourage her to seek medical help?
I did. She had hurt her arm, um, and I wanted her to go get it looked at. She was trying to rub this bruising ointment on it.
Okay.
She refused to go.
Okay. At some point, she did go to the doctor for the injury, however. Do you recall that?
I don't recall the exact time that happened.
Okay. Were there other issues that you had concerns about your mother's health?
We worked in the yard together a lot, and I was her muscle. She would direct me where to dig and move stuff and cinder blocks and garden things um and yeah, she had a hard time doing those heavier things.
And why do you say she had a hard time with it?
She would get really winded really easily.
Okay. And is that something that happened in the last year of her life, or was that the entire time that you knew her?
I would say it became increasingly more towards the end of her life.
Okay. Okay. Were there any other concerns about any sort of other medical issues of her being able to keep her balance or anything like that that caused you concern?
She would have fainting spells.
And how often would that happen?
Um, it was usually after she'd been kneeling for a while.
Okay. Was there ever a discussion in your family about her having some difficulty in the temple with kneeling?
Yes.
What was that concerned?
Objection, Your Honor, this calls for hearsay.
Sustained.
Okay. I want to go back to the incident with the paintball gun in your mother. Do you recall that day?
I do.
It was approximately the 9th of October. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall where you were at that point?
I was on the couch.
Okay. Who was home at that point?
It was me watching TV and my dad was working on the computer.
Okay. And then at some point, did your mother come home?
She did.
And how did she approach you when she got home?
She came in really panic stricken, saying someone had attacked her.
Okay, and did she say with what?
She said with a paintball gun.
Okay. Did you have a discussion with her prior to taking any action?
So when she said that, I was filled with rage and I wanted to go find whoever had done this. And but before I chased after someone with a gun, I said, "Are you sure it was a paintball gun?"
Okay.
And she said, "Yes, it had the thing on top."
The thing on top. What do you mean the thing on top?
Um, I think she was referring to the hopper on top where you put the paintballs.
Did she specifically identify a hopper on top of that gun?
She did by showing me a picture on the computer and pointing to the hopper on the picture.
Did she Google a picture
She did.
and she showed you the picture on the computer?
Yes.
Now I want to go with one other topic. At some point, your father and your mother and you were there. Is that correct?
Yes.
And were all of you looking at this image on the computer?
Yes.
Okay, and then an officer by the name of Coulter Cannon showed up at that point. Do you recall that?
I do.
And at some point, did you or your father and mother show Officer Cannon the picture of the paintball gun on the computer?
We did.
And who was present when that took place?
I believe it was my mother, my father, and me and the officer.
Okay, and is there any doubt that you showed the officer the image on the computer?
There's no doubt in my mind.
Okay. I'd like to move on and again, if at any point you need to take a break, you let me know. Or if you need some water or if for some reason you let
I'll
me know.
take a quick sip.
Okay. I want to talk to you a little bit about the evening of October 18th. Okay, and that was the evening before your mother passed.
Yes.
Um, you were working that day and you mentioned something about in October, you were working at a scare what?
So there's a local haunted house in Teton, Idaho, which is about 20-ish, maybe half an hour away from where I lived, and a seasonal attraction that I would go work. I'm dressed up in a costume to scare people.
Okay. And at that point, did you have an occasion before going in to do that to come home
Come home from,
from your first job?
yes.
And walk me through that as to what after you got home from work from the first job, what did you do next?
So I came home, and mom usually came home before me, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
And she told me, "I just don't feel good today. I don't want to cook tonight. Can you go get some McDonald's for us?"
Now that's a long way to a McDonald's, is it not?
Uh, well, I mean, we're used to driving into town for various things.
So
So,
then what town did you drive to for the McDonald's?
Rexburg.
Okay. And forgive me, I don't recall if there is a McDonald's in Rexburg.
There's two.
Oh. Okay. Uh, Then did you get some food for you folks?
I did.
Who did you get food for?
So I bought food for me and my father and my mother.
Okay, do you recall what you got for your mother?
Her favorite meal was the quarter pounder with cheese.
A healthy meal.
Depends.
And anything else?
Um, I don't remember if she wanted anything else with it, and fries.
Okay.
Yeah, I feel like I got her a combo.
And then you went to work at the Haunted Mill. Is that what that's called?
Yep. So about 7-ish, I left, and she was sitting on the couch and said, "Have a fun time. We'll see you tomorrow. I'll let you sleep in."
Okay. And then at some point you got home at about what time?
So I got home about 1 a.m. shortly after that.
Okay. And then at that point, again, you previously testified the distance between your bedroom and your mother and father's bedroom. Is that right?
Yes.
And the distance there was about how far?
About 20 feet.
Okay, and then at some point, did you hear anything coming from your mother and father's bedroom?
As I passed their bedroom, I heard my father snoring.
And is it clear that it was your father snoring?
Yes,
Okay. You had no other indication of that your mother was snoring or making any noise?
I didn't hear anything of that sort.
You didn't see any images in the bedroom of any kind of a struggle or a fight or any kind of an altercation, did you?
No, as far as I knew, it was a normal night.
Okay. And then at some point, what did you do after you went into your bedroom?
I got on my computer and I watched YouTube for a few hours,
And when you say a few hours, what does that mean?
till about 3 a.m. So
Okay.
2 hours-ish.
Okay. And then at early in the morning, at some point, you were awoken, is that right?
Yes.
And how were you awoken?
I heard my dad saying, Garth, get up. I need help.
Okay.
And I got out of bed and ran over to help.
And then when you walked into your parents' bedroom, what exactly did you observe?
I observed my mother had rolled partially out of bed with her legs entangled in the sheets. And my instinct was, oh, she needs help. So I immediately grabbed her by the shoulders and lifted her up back into the bed.
Okay. And at that point, you felt her arms were cold?
Yeah, I felt she was cold and stiff and
Okay.
she was gray, and I realized she's not been breathing.
Okay. Okay. And at some point between the time you got home at 1 o'clock and the time you went to sleep at about 3 o'clock, did you hear anything or any indication that there was any kind of sound or struggle?
I heard nothing.
Okay. And would you agree that it's close enough that if there was some kind of a struggle or a fight or anything that you would have heard it?
I would have definitely heard it.
You present with the discussion with the Flams about when to have the funeral?
I was.
And what do you recall of that conversation?
Um, I don't remember exactly what he said, but he said it seems pretty simple here. We can have a funeral this day or this day, and
Do you have a recollection of which the two choices
I
of days
feel like
were?
it was either Tuesday or Saturday.
Okay. And you could choose, and was it your impression that the family would have been able to choose either day?
I do, yeah. I feel like we would have been able to.
I want to fast forward to a vacation to Knott's Berry Farms. You remember that?
I do.
Do you have a recollection of how long that trip was planned in advance?
It was about a week, it felt like a week ahead.
Okay. And at that point, when I say all of you, your family gathered in Rexburg or St. Anthony, is that correct?
Yeah, we were at that house.
Okay. And who was with you at the time when you decided to head to Salt Lake City?
It was um my dad and um me and Emma and Joe, and that might have been it. Or Adam and Leah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And at the time, was Lori Vallow with you guys at that point?
She was not with us at that point.
And then you drove to Salt Lake City, is that correct?
We drove to Salt Lake City to go to the airport there.
And then you flew to California?
Yes.
And at some point later on in the trip, Lori Vallow showed up separately driving to the California location?
She did.
Okay. I want to talk to you a little bit about how you discovered that they exhumed your mother's remains. Do you recall how you were able to discover that?
I first heard about it from my sister, Emma.
Okay. At any point, did any law enforcement officer ever reach out to you or to your knowledge, anyone in your family to advise you that they were going to dig up your mother?
No one contacted us. It was a complete surprise.
I want to talk to you a little bit about May 7th of 2021. Do you recall that day for some reason?
I do.
And what happened on that particular day?
It started out as what was going to be a normal school day, and
So I want to stop you there. When you say a normal school day, would that be a day that you were going to teach school?
yes, I was going to go and do my job.
Okay, what transpired on that particular day?
I went out to the driveway to my car, and there were several law enforcement vehicles across the street, and several officers got out and surrounded me and um, insisted that I go with them.
Okay, do you recall the names of the officers and which agency they were with?
I remember that Detective Ball was there and
Detective Ron Ball,
Ron Ball,
okay?
Detective Hermosillo,
That's Ray Hermosillo.
Hermosillo, and then I called him Vinny Kaikamanu.
Would that be Officer Kai Kamano right
That
here
would-
in the gray suit?
That would be him.
He was one of those that showed up at your house?
Yes.
Okay. And at that point, what transpired?
I told them, "Do you have a warrant?" And they said, "No, but you need to come with us anyway."
Did they give you any choice?
I felt like I had no choice.
And then what transpired next?
They drove me to the police station. They confiscated my phone.
Okay, was anybody with you at that point?
At that point, no.
Did you later learn that they also took custody of somebody else?
Yes, they had then gone up to the door.
Objection, Your Honor. Move to strike that question. It mischaracterizes the testimony.
Sustained.
Okay, what transpired after they took you into custody?
Objection, Your Honor, again misstates the testimony. Move to strike.
I'll rephrase, Judge, I'm sorry. After the police officers told you that they were going to take you, what transpired next?
I was taken to the police station, and then I saw that they had also detained my wife and brought her in a separate car.
Were you two kept together in the same room?
We were kept in separate rooms the entire time.
And when you say the entire time, how long did they keep you in the separate rooms?
About 5 or 6 hours.
Okay, at any point, did they try to talk to you?
They did.
Okay, and what was the nature of the discussion?
They were telling me that my story was untrue and that I needed to change it.
Objection, Your Honor. Move to strike. Calls for hearsay.
Overruled.
When you say they told you they needed you to change your story or that they didn't believe you, who is they?
The 3 detectives that I've mentioned.
Were there any other detectives there?
There was a Detective Mattingly who was with my wife.
Okay, and at some point, is it your understanding they were doing the same thing to your wife?
She tells me they never talked to her.
Objection, Your Honor. Calls for hearsay.
Sustained.
Okay. And at some point, did you ask to have an attorney represent you?
I did.
And at some point after, and you said it was between 5 and 6 hours?
Yes,
And at some point, were you released?
I was.
Were you subsequently charged with anything as a result of being detained?
I was not.
Did they take any further action with you as a result of being detained?
They did not.
Okay. And then subsequent to that, was there another occasion when you were accused of or asked to change your story?
I was summoned to 2 separate grand juries.
Okay, I want to talk about the second grand jury. Do you recall that?
I do.
And do you have an understanding of why you were summoned in front of the grand jury?
It was made pretty plain that I needed to change my story to fit theirs.
Okay, and in the event you didn't change your story, you would be indicted by the grand jury?
Yes, and they had a list of charges that they were threatening me with.
Okay, when you say they were threatening with you, who are you talking about?
I didn't talk to them specifically
Okay,
myself. I had asked for an attorney who was going in between us.
and who is that attorney?
His name was Forrest Fisher.
And at this point, you are willing to waive your attorney-client privilege and allow Mr. Fisher to discuss the case?
Yes,
Okay. And your understanding of going in front of the grand jury is that you were going to be indicted unless you changed your story?
yes.
And do you know what prosecutorial agency was attempting to do this to you?
I believe it was Fremont and Madison counties.
Okay, and at that point, Did you testify in front of that second grand jury?
I did.
Okay. Now, before you testified in that second grand jury, you had previously testified in a grand jury that was related to your father. Is that correct?
Yes,
And at that point, you told us what you believed was your version of the facts of this case, correct?
correct.
And at the second grand jury, they brought you in and the focus of the second grand jury, did you understand that to be you being charged with a grand jury offense?
It, I understand that it was that way. I felt very, I was feeling extremely pressured.
Pressured by who?
The prosecutors,
And at some point you testified in front of the grand jury, is that correct?
correct?
Did you tell relatively the same story to both grand juries?
I told the identical story.
At any time, were you ever indicted by the second grand jury brought by the prosecuting attorneys against you?
I was not.
But you felt that at that point, the purpose of the second grand jury was to try to threaten or persuade you to change your story. Is that correct?
Yes,
Now, your your faith is you're of the LDS faith. Is that correct?
that is correct.
And how would you characterize? Let me put it this way: would you agree that your faith is maybe different than your father's?
I believe I interpret it differently.
Okay. How would you describe your father's faith?
I would say it's more traditional, meaning closer to the way it was 100 years ago.
Okay. And you've had discussions with your father over the years regarding his faith. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Did he ever talk to you about a plan or a plan that he had in place?
He had a,
Objection, Your Honor, calls for hearsay.
Sustained.
Judge, I'm not asking him if he said, I asked whether there was ever that discussion. It's not hearsay, I don't believe, Judge.
It's sustained.
Were you aware that your father had beliefs about the 144,000?
I do.
Okay. Was there any discussion, let me move on for a minute, Judge. That's all right. You talk about the differences between your religious faith and your father's religious faith. Can you identify some of the differences that you believe? You believe you're of the mainstream LDS faith. Is that fair?
Yes,
And you testified previously that your father's more traditional or fundamental or more traditional, I guess.
yes.
And what would be the differences that you identified as differences in interpretation?
Well, I teach and believe in evolution. I
Okay.
teach that to my students.
Okay.
I teach that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, as opposed to 6,000.
Okay. And do you share your father's views on light and dark?
Partially.
Okay. And explain that to me a little bit.
Light and dark to me mean like good and evil, good and bad, opposing forces.
Okay. Okay. And did your mother and father share similar views of fundamental LDS faith?
They did.
Okay. And your mother shared your father's beliefs to your knowledge of this light and dark?
Yes.
What about the idea of putting numeric numbers on people who are identified as either light or dark?
They did that every now and again.
Okay. And they did that in your presence?
Yes.
Okay. Now, your understanding, and I'm going to hack this this person, but I think I previously yesterday talked to you about the book Saints and about a
Dual night.
Newell Knight. And we talked about that yesterday, right?
Yes.
And in that situation, there was a casting of a sword, correct?
Yes.
And who was doing the casting?
That was Joseph Smith.
And who was he casting?
He was casting a devil, as they described it, out of Newell Night.
Okay, and at the end of the casting, and was this more of a traditional story of the LDS faith?
It's one that it's usually included in storybooks about the church history and stuff.
Okay, but would you agree that it's more of a fundamental, it's not necessarily as mainstream as it once was?
Yes.
Okay, so it would be more akin to your father's beliefs.
Yeah, I don't know if it's one that would be told as often anymore.
Okay, and in that particular situation, this is the prophet of your church, Joseph Smith?
Yes.
And at that point, he expelled the devil or the demon from Newell Knight.
Yes.
Did Newell Knight die after they expelled the demon from him?
No, he went on to do great things.
Okay, and at some point, is it your understanding that when someone expels a dark spirit or a negative spirit, that they die after that?
No, they continue living.
Okay. Judge, I don't have anything else at this point. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right. You're ready, cross-examination, Ms. Blake.
Mr. Daybell, I'm going to start with, there was some talk of who drove a Dodge Dakota. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And there seemed to be maybe a little bit of confusion there.
I believe that since the events were 7 years ago, I had trouble recalling which was which.
And your recollection is that your dad is actually the one that drove it in the later years?
Yes.
Do you know Joseph Murray?
I do.
How do you know him?
He is my brother-in-law.
Why would Joe Murray in 2019, October of 2019 to be exact, would it surprise you to learn that he referred to the truck as your mom's?
I hadn't heard of that.
Would it surprise you to learn that he had to return the keys, get the keys from her to borrow the truck and then return them to her?
I hadn't heard of that.
So your mom did in fact drive the Dodge Dakota, at least at times?
She did on occasion.
You talked about your dad telling you about a raccoon that he'd shot around September 9th of 2019. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And you said that he'd buried it.
Mhm.
Do you remember where he buried it?
He buried it
First.
behind. Sorry.
No, I cut you off. I apologize. Do you remember where he said he buried it?
He showed me that it was behind the silver shed.
Were you present when he buried it?
I was not.
You talked about having some concerns about your mom getting winded. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Did you ever share those concerns with law enforcement or the coroner or deputy coroner that showed up on the day of your mother's passing?
I don't recall.
Did you ever share those concerns with law enforcement?
I wouldn't have considered losing your breath to be something law enforcement would be worried about.
At some point, did you learn that an autopsy was going to be conducted on your mom?
I did after I had learned she had been exhumed.
And even with an autopsy being performed, you didn't think that it might be something law enforcement would want to know?
I assumed they would find it.
Did you ever shoot paintball guns with your mom?
I did not.
Did you ever see her with a paintball gun?
I did not.
Did you ever see her with an assault rifle?
I did not.
Would it surprise you if Deputy Cannon said he was never shown an image of a paintball gun on October 9th of 2019?
It would because he was there.
I think you testified that initially when your mom came running in, you were upset.
Yes.
Is it fair to say you wanted to catch whoever this was that had pointed some kind of a gun at her?
Yes, I wanted to catch them.
When you ran outside, did you see anyone?
I did not. It was so dark that I couldn't. Yeah, he could have been anywhere.
You said it was so dark that night.
When I went out, yes.
You were asked about the events of October 19th of 2019 from council. Do you recall that?
Yes.
I want to back up a little bit. Do you recall when you got home from work?
It was a little after 1.
And what did you do when you got home from work?
I pulled into the driveway, went in the house, and got ready for bed. And then, as I said earlier, I watched YouTube for a few hours.
Did you see either of your parents when you got home?
They were both in bed.
And how did you know they were both in bed?
I saw their forms, their shapes in the bed as I passed by their room.
Did you go in and talk to them?
I did not. They were asleep.
You say they were asleep, but did you actually go in the room?
I assumed they were asleep.
So two bodies lying in the bed.
Yes.
Anyone else in the house when you got home?
It was just us.
What woke you up on the morning of October 19th of 2019?
I thought I heard a thump, and then I heard my dad say, "Garth, come help."
And when you went in the room, well, let me back up. Did you in fact go in the room?
I did.
What did you see when you got in there?
I saw her halfway off the bed with her legs still entangled in the blankets.
What action, if any, did you take at that time?
I immediately thought she needs my help, so I lifted her immediately back up into the bed.
Are you close with your mom?
Extremely close.
And council talked to you about May 7th of 2021. Do you recall that?
I do.
Do you recall law enforcement actually knocking on your door?
I do not. They waited till I was at my car.
And do you recall when you got to the police station that they left the door open to the interview room?
They did.
And do you recall that they immediately told you they'd call your attorney?
I believe I had to ask for one.
And did your attorney in fact show up?
A few hours later,
And was your attorney present for questioning?
he was.
Did law enforcement actually get you breakfast?
They did buy me some McDonald's. They offered and I accepted.
And prior to May 7th, had you had a meeting with law enforcement where they had talked to you about the results of your mom's autopsy?
Yes, Detective Ika Manu and a FBI agent came to my classroom after school.
And when they talked to you, were you willing to hear them out on the results?
They did tell me the results.
And do you recall on May 7th going over that autopsy again?
I did not.
Do you recall one of the detectives telling you that your mother's death
Sustained.
Do you recall talking to an individual named Micaiah Baglin and telling him you found your mom dead in her bed and your dad gone?
I don't recall talking to him about that.
Do you recall talking to Cara Briggs, who's now Cara Daybell, and Emma Moss about finding your mom on the couch?
I told Kara. She's now my wife.
And there was talk of some testimony at some grand juries. Do you recall that?
Um,
Sorry, let me back up. Let me rephrase that. Do you recall counsel asking you about having testified at a couple proceedings?
Sorry, I was I I don't quite know the rules, but when you were talking to me about Kara and Emma, can you repeat that question? I don't know if
Yes. Do you recall telling Cara and or Emma about finding your mom on the couch?
I did not tell them that she was on the couch.
Do you recall having talked to one or both of them?
I do. I had told them that the night before I had seen her on the couch as she said goodbye to me.
And if they were to say something different, would that surprise you?
I mean, I've heard that before.
And then do you recall counsel talking to you about you having testified at a couple grand jury proceedings?
Yes.
And are you aware that the second grand jury was held based on the request of the first grand jury?
Judge, I'm going to object. That calls for speculation,
I'm asking her if he's
argumentative,
aware.
Judge.
Well, the question.
There's no
is-
foundation.
Yeah, it's just, the question is whether he's aware. You can answer.
Are you aware that the second grand jury was conducted based on the request of the first grand jury?
I was not aware of that.
And counsel asked you about Joseph Smith in a casting. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And what did you indicate happened to the person that they were casting on?
He continued to live on and lived his life.
Are you aware of your mom having been designated as being possessed?
I had not heard that before.
Had you ever heard of JJ Vallow being designated as being possessed?
I had not heard that.
What about Tylee Ryan?
I had not heard that.
Is your mom still alive?
She is not.
Do you know where the remains of Tylee Ryan and JJ Vallow were located?
They were found in the backyard
And when you say the backyard, whose backyard?
of my father's.
I have no further questions.
All right. Back to Mr. Pryor.
Garth, regardless of what the first grand jury may or may not have believed, did you understand that the second grand jury was convened to determine whether or not you were being untruthful in any way and whether you should face perjury charges?
And that's the way I understood it.
Okay. And again, who brought that grand jury against you?
Objection, Your Honor, asked and answered.
Sustained.
Okay. And your recollection and your belief is that you were not indicted by the grand jury, correct?
That is correct.
And did you feel like that someone was trying to intimidate or threaten you to change your testimony?
I do, yes.
And who would that be?
Madison and Fremont County.
Judge, that's all I have at this point. And Judge, we need a sidebar just very briefly.
Very
And
well.
Your Honor, before we do that, I would request a brief recross
On what topic?
on the topic of the furtherance of the grand jury and what he believed.
Just on that very narrow topic, Ms. Blake, I'll allow that and we'll have the sidebar after that.
Thank you.
But Ms. Blake, not to expand the scope of where it's already gone on, direct or cross, please.
Mr. Daybell, did you in fact change your testimony between the first and second grand jury?
I did not.
No further questions.
All right, thank you, counsel.
Sidebar, Judge.
Very well. All right, thank you, counsel. We're looking at scheduling here with the afternoon, and there's a matter we need to take up with the next witness outside the presence of the public and the jurors. And I understand it will be a fairly quick witness after that, and the matter won't take long, but we do need to do that on the record. And so we're going to arrange a spot to meet with the witness and counsel outside the presence of the courtroom. I am going to ask that everybody just remain in the courtroom while we take care of that business. Optional if you'd like, but everybody, of course, is allowed to stand up and stretch if you'd like. If you do leave the courtroom, though, you won't be permitted reentry, and we'll try to resolve that as quickly as possible and then have that witness take the stand. So we'll go ahead and go on the record outside the presence of everyone take up this issue, and then we'll be right back.
All right.
Thank you. Please be seated. Very well. At this point, then I believe the testimony of the witness has concluded. Is the defense intending to keep the witness under subpoena?
No, Your Honor.
I don't know if the state had him under subpoena or not.
The state also had a subpoena. We would release Mr. Daybell as well.
Okay, thank you. That concludes your testimony. You can go ahead and step down.
Judge, can I have again permission to approach the podium?
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, Mr. Pryor, you can call your next witness.
Defense would call Forrest Fisher.
Very well.
Solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help you God.
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Speak directly into the microphone. Thank you.
May I, Judge?
You may. You can
Would you
inquire
state-
after.
Would you state your name, spell your last name for the record?
Thank you. Yes, William Forrest Fisher. Fisher is Fischer.
Mr. Fisher, how are you employed?
I am an attorney with Moulton Law Office in Driggs, Idaho.
Okay, and you're licensed to practice law in the state of Idaho?
I am.
Did you have an occasion in December of 2021 in regards to a client by the name of Garth Daybell?
I did.
What was the nature of that representation?
As part of my employment, my office contracts out with Fremont County to do contract public defense work. And so under that contract, I was asked to come down to St. Anthony to the Fremont County Courthouse to represent Mr. Daybell, who at that time was under a grand jury testimony situation.
Was it a grand jury indictment against Mr. Daybell? Or proceeding?
It was a proceeding.
Okay, and the distinction is that a grand jury is summoned and they hear testimony, is that right?
I believe so. This was actually my first encounter with a grand jury.
Oh, okay. Lucky you.
Yes.
And at that point, were you aware of what charges were being attempted to be brought against Mr. Daybell?
I was not, nor that I can't really recall it this time.
Okay. But you do recall that it was Mr. Daybell was the focus of the grand jury?
Mr. Garth Daybell, yeah, that is correct. That's
Okay.
correct.
And you don't have any recollection of what the underlying facts were about why he was brought in front of the grand jury?
Not specifically. It was a long time ago. I can't really recall. I do recall at that time, he had actually previously testified in front of the grand jury. And when I was brought in, the grand jury had some follow-up questions, and that's what I was called in to assist him with during that time.
So you don't remember if this was a second grand jury that was convened?
I believe it was the second time they called him in. I'm not sure if that was a completely separate grand jury. I believe it was the same grand jury, but I can't really recall.
You're not sure about that?
That's correct.
Okay. Is it possible that it was a second grand jury convening against Mr. Daybell for perjury?
Objection, Your Honor. Asked and answered calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Do you have any recollection of the advice that you gave Mr. Daybell at that point?
Some. At that time, I had come in and Mr. Garth Daybell had some questions. He was concerned, given the fact that they had asked him some questions and he had previously testified. And so I consulted him as a defense attorney to answer only the question that was being asked, and that if he wasn't quite sure that he could take the time to confer with me. I was not in the grand jury. I wasn't observing it. I was sitting outside of the courtroom. And I told him that if he ever needed to take a break, he could come talk to me. We could talk about the situation and go from there. Beyond that, I told him not to talk to the press anymore.
Okay. And at this point, you don't have any distinct recollection as to why you were there or what you were doing, is that right?
I was there to advise him on giving testimony in his follow-up grand jury questioning. And my role as a defense attorney, and I believe in talking to Mr. Daybell at that time, was to ensure that he did not get himself into any trouble by possibly committing perjury or not remembering something quite correctly. I was there to assist him and to ensure that he, if he had questions, that he could come and talk to me and that we could go through it a step-by-step basis.
Do you recall ever telling Mr. Daybell that this was a trap designed to catch him?
I don't recall ever saying that, though that would possibly be something that I might have said. I don't recall specifically.
Okay.
As a defense attorney, that's always something that we're concerned about, is that if they've previously testified on something, that if they're called to testify on the same thing again, that there is the potential as a defense attorney to potentially cross yourself. And so to watch out for that.
And your understanding is the focus of the grand jury wasn't about Chad Daybell, it was solely about Garth Daybell and his previous testimony. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And at this point, your understanding is that grand jury did not indict Mr. Daybell for any kind of perjury charge. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Judge, I have nothing else.
All right. Any cross?
Just briefly, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Mr. Fisher, it was your understanding then that it was the same grand jury with some additional questions?
I don't really, I presume, but I didn't know for sure.
At the end of the day, you provided legal advice to your client, correct?
That is correct.
And he testified in that second proceeding,
That is correct.
and there was no indictment.
That is correct.
I have no further questions.
All right, thank
No
you.
follow-up, Judge.
Very well, that'll conclude the testimony. Mr. Fisher, thank you for appearing.
Thank
See
you, Your
back
Honor.
in Driggs someday.
All right. Thank you.
I have cases out there as well. All right, at this point, given the time, I think this will be a good stopping point for the mid-afternoon break. Is that what council would request as well?
Yes, Your Honor, if that's the court's prerogative, I think that would be appropriate.
All right, we'll go ahead and take our mid-afternoon break then. We'll plan on starting right back up at 2:30, please.
All right, please. District Court's again in session.
Thank you. We've got our jurors, I believe, lined up in the hall, so I think we can just stay standing and we'll have them brought in, please, Mr. Bailiff.
All right, please. Please, President Counter for Your Honor.
Thank you. Please be seated. All right, that concludes the mid-afternoon recess. Mr. Pryor, continuing with the defense case in chief, if you'd like to call your next witness, you may. Yes.
You solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Right there.
May I, Judge?
Give me just a second. I'm checking one thing quickly. All right. Just checking the status of this exclusionary order, Mr. Pryor. I don't believe it applies here. So if you would like to inquire on direct, you can do that at this time.
Would you state your name, spell your last name for the record for me, please?
Joseph Murray. Do you want my middle name as well, or
That's okay. Joseph
Yep.
Murray.
and then Murray?
And do you know the gentleman to my left in the blue shirt over there?
I do.
Who is that?
That is my father-in-law.
Okay, and you are married to Emma Murray?
Correct.
How long have you been married?
This August will be 7 years.
How many children do you have?
3.
Okay, and a newborn, I understand, right?
Correct.
And to be fair, we met yesterday evening to discuss the case. Is that correct?
That is correct.
How many other prior occasions did you and I well, I don't think we ever met, but we spoke on the phone. Were there any other occasions
Just once.
prior to that?
Yep. And it was very brief. It was maybe 5 minutes.
Okay. Did I tell you anything to say to the jury or anybody else today?
Nope.
Did I ask you to do anything in particular in regards to this case?
Nope.
I want to talk to you about October 9th of 2019. Do you recall that day?
Or 9th.
If I say that there was a paintball incident, does that help refresh? your
Okay.
memory?
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall what you were doing on that day?
May I ask what time of day? Just, is there a particular
I
time?
wanna- In the evening hours.
In the evening hours. Okay. In the evening hours, I was out in the shed behind my house, chopping wood for our fireplace.
Okay. Did anything unusual occur shortly thereafter?
While I was out in the wood shed chopping, I got a notification on my phone that Tammy, my mother-in-law, Tammy Daybell, had posted in the local Facebook group saying that somebody had attempted to shoot her with a paintball gun. And So I went inside to talk with my wife and asked her if she had seen the or she'd seen the message as well. And she said she hadn't. She called Tammy, and I asked her to, because it was on speakerphone, I asked, did you call law enforcement? And she said no. So then I made a phone call to law enforcement at that time.
Was that prior to talking to Tammy about the incident?
That I called.
Yes.
It was after.
So you spoke to Tammy before you called 911?
Correct.
And do you recall, without saying what Tammy said, what the nature of the conversation was about?
She said that.
No, I don't want you to say what she
Sorry.
said.
So the conversation was of the nature that she or Emma had tried to figure out, what was going on. And she had told, or during that conversation, it was brought up that the person that had shot at her.
Objection, hearsay, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Did you ever get any indication of the type of weapon that was used during this encounter?
Objection,
Answers
calls for
you.
hearsay, Your Honor.
Sustained.
At some point then, after discussing the case with Tammy, was your wife there as well?
Yes. And in the Facebook post that she had written, it specifically said.
Objection, calls for hearsay, Your Honor.
She said that it was a paintball gun and that it had something up on top similar to a paintball gun.
Did you have an occasion to talk to Emma or without saying what they said? Did you have an occasion to talk to Emma or to talk to Tammy about this thing that was supposedly on top that you referenced?
I hadn't.
Okay. So then you took it upon yourself to call 911. Is that correct?
Correct.
Do you recall what you said during that conversation with the 911?
That my mother-in-law had been, or had said that she had been shot at by a.
Objection, hearsay.
Sustained.
What specifically did you say to the operator in 911 about not necessarily what your mother-in-law said, but what you reported occurred?
That my mother-in-law was shot at by a.
Objection, Your Honor. It calls for hearsay.
That calls in evidence, Mr. Wixom. So it's overruled.
Judge, I did hear overruled.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sorry, re-ask your question. Sorry.
Madam Clerk, could you read back the last question, Tim? I want to make sure we're accurate on this.
Okay, so I don't know verbatim what I had said on the phone call, as that was several years ago. But I had told them that my mother-in-law was shot at by somebody with a paintball gun, and that somebody had and that the person had run off based off of what my mother-in-law had told me.
Okay. So at this point, at any time during this incident, did you see anybody run off around the house or near the house at that time?
No.
During this incident with the paintball gun, where were you specifically when you got that Facebook notification?
I was in the woodshed because I lived kitty corner from them at the time.
Okay.
I was in the woodshed, which was behind my house, which was not even in the view of my in-laws' house at that point.
Okay. At any time, did you hear a scream or a yell?
Nope.
Did you hear any kind of noise or commotion over there?
Nope.
Did you hear any kind of a swishing sound or anything that would indicate a rifle was shot off?
Nope.
Now, back in that woodshed, you may not have heard a swishing because you were quite a ways away,
Yep.
correct? But again, you didn't see anything either, correct?
Nope.
And at any time, did you ever tell a police officer and advise a well, let me put it this way. Do you remember talking to a Coulter Cannon?
I do.
Okay, how did that transpire in your discussions with Officer Coulter Cannon?
So, after making the phone call, I continued out chopping wood. And I was actually over by my garden because I was trying to watch to see so that I could talk to the police officer. So I was closer or away from my house at that point, in the pasture. And I had seen him approaching, and so I ran up to him. He was still in his vehicle at the time, just across the street on the west side of the home. And I told him what I had or that I had called, and that um, based off of what I understood, that the person had run off,
Okay.
and I don't know what the person looked like.
And how long of a conversation would this have taken place with Officer Coulter Cannon?
Less than a few minutes. It wasn't very long because I wanted him to be able to have the time to go look for the suspect.
Are you relatively clear on what you said to Coulter Cannon that day?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay. At any time, did you advise Officer Coulter Cannon that you observed someone running off from the house and running behind the house?
I did not,
How certain are you that you never made that statement to Officer Coulter Cannon?
without a doubt.
Did you talk to Officer Coulter Cannon about this being a paintball gun?
Yes,
At any time with Officer Coulter Cannon, did you mention the words high-powered rifle or scope or any of those descriptions?
no, I did not.
At a time, did you describe that Tammy Daybell saw a thing on top of the gun or the paintball gun?
Not at that time, I did not.
Okay. Subsequent to this, did you have an occasion to talk to any other members of the family about this incident?
Um, Directly after?
Yeah.
Just my wife.
Okay, okay. Did the two of you discuss that whether or not this was a paintball gun or not?
We didn't.
Did that discussion ever even get breached at any kind during the discussion with your wife?
No,
Was it very clear to you that this was a paintball gun that was used on that day?
based off of what my mother-in-law had explained to me, yes.
Objection here, State Honor.
Overruled.
Thank you, Judge. I think he answered it, Judge. You said overruled, did you not,
I
Judge?
said overruled and he answered
Yeah.
yes.
I think he answered it already, Judge, well, before he even said it, I
Correct.
believe. All right, thank you, Your Honor. May I move on, Judge?
Yes.
Thank you. I want to talk about the Friday, October 18th, which would be the day before your mother-in-law passed away. Do you recall that day?
I do.
Before I get to that subject, I want to talk to you about something about a 2000 and, I'm going to get it right, a 2004 Dodge Dakota.
Okay.
Do you have that vehicle?
I do.
When did you get that vehicle?
It would have been in the spring of 2020.
Spring of,
Late 2019, early 2020. I can't remember exactly.
you don't know when. When you say late 2019, what would?
Like December.
Okay.
Yeah, it would have been December because I had just gotten, it was like closer to the end of December.
Who did you get that from?
For my father-in-law, Chad Daybell.
You previously testified, well, maybe you didn't previously testify. I think you made mention that you lived kitty corner to Chad and Tammy's home. Is that correct?
That is correct.
With your wife?
Correct.
And at this point, I don't recall whether there were kids at that point, correct?
Just one.
One.
Yep.
You're up to three now, right?
Yep.
And growing.
Yep.
Okay. Did you have an occasion to observe Chad's regular patterns of travel, living kitty corner to him?
Yes, because at that time I was working I was working at the hospital, and my shifts would start usually at noon. And so I would have to get ready and take our son to daycare. And oftentimes during that time, I would cross paths with Chad as he was heading to the Salem church.
So you're familiar with his individual patterns of travel in the mornings, is that correct?
Correct.
And about what time, you mentioned something about the Salem church. About what time did you see him going to the Salem church?
About 9 o'clock in the morning.
How consistent, that's a big word. How often would you see that? Was that a regular activity? A pretty regular situation, him doing that?
Yes.
Did he ever vary that a little bit and maybe go to a different religious institution that you're aware of?
I know because and when I would see him, he would be leaving the house generally, and he had his um, laptop case in his hand and some uh, paper. And sometimes he'd head to the Salem church, but there were other times that he didn't head to the church. But and I knew that he did some writing at the college as well.
BYU
from that.
library?
Yep.
And when you say consistent pattern, would you say that it was an everyday event that Chad would travel in the morning to either the Salem church or the BYU library?
I would say I would say the majority of each day of the week of Monday through Friday.
Okay. And the vehicle, if we were to go back to late 2018 until late 2019, when you were provided that vehicle, who was the primary driver of the 2004 black Dodge Dakota?
During which time, sorry?
2018, late 2018, let's say November, December of 2018, to the time you acquired it in late 2019. Who was the one primarily responsible for driving the Dodge Dakota?
Chad was
All right, what did Tammy drive?
a black. Well, I don't know when they got I think that was when they got the Equinox because they used to have a blue Dodge Caravan. But then they bought I don't know what year it was, but it was a black Equinox.
Okay. So at some point, it was Tammy who would drive the newer car
Yep,
and Chad would drive the older car.
correct.
And whenever you saw Chad travel during his daily visits to the Salem church on a regular basis, it was the black Dodge Dakota that you would see him driving. Is that correct?
Yes, occasionally Equinox, but generally it was the truck.
Now, there was an occasion in October of 2018, which is where I'm leading to, that you had to retrieve keys regarding the black Dodge Dakota. Is that correct?
Correct.
And on Friday of October 18th, were you aware or did you have any knowledge that Tammy Daybell on that day was involved in preparing for a book fair?
Yes.
Okay. And at that point, she had utilized the black Dodge Dakota. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And did you have to go and borrow that for some reason?
Yes. So that fall, there was a really major issue with like the potatoes freezing. And I was helping my friend who was trying to get their potatoes in. And at the time, my wife and I only had one working vehicle. And I was transporting her back and forth to work. And she was at work and I went to pick her up and I was talking to her about how my friend needed help finishing getting the potatoes in but we didn't have a vehicle and I wasn't sure how we were going to get her home and be at work because we'd be in two different places. And Tammy said I could use the truck.
Okay.
And she would my wife would take her home.
Now, you described to when you were interviewed, and you were interviewed several times and testified in front of a grand jury. Is that correct?
I wasn't interviewed, but I testified in the grand jury. Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's correct.
Yep.
And at some point during that testimony, you indicated that you needed to go get her keys.
Correct.
What did you mean by her keys?
Well, the keys to the truck.
Okay. So it wasn't necessarily the truck she was driving all the time. It was just her set of keys.
Yeah. Yeah. It was her set of keys that had both the truck key and the Equinox key on it.
Oh, it did?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, after you had borrowed the truck, you came back after, and my recollection is you were aiding your friend with the potato harvest. That right?
Correct.
Okay. And you decided to return, the keys to the black Dodge back to Chad and Tammy. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And at that point, did you visit the home?
I did.
Did you have an occasion to visit with Tammy at that point?
I did.
And approximately what time was that?
I want to say it was around 5 o'clock, 5:30. It was about the time I think I left. I can't recall exact, but it was in the early evening.
Did you have an occasion to talk to Tammy?
Yes,
I don't want you to say what she said, though.
no.
please.
I went into their house and I handed her the keys. And at that time, she was sitting on the couch. in the
Okay,
living
was
room.
Chad there as well?
He was.
Okay. So when you handed her the keys, is there a reason why you gave them to her as opposed to Chad?
Because they were her set of keys for both of their vehicles.
Did Chad also have a set of keys to those vehicles?
Yes,
Okay. So when you use the term, and that's where I'm getting at, so when you use the term her keys, they were actually her set of keys for both vehicles, correct?
correct.
Chad also had a set of keys, which would be referred to as his keys, right?
Yep. Similar to my wife and mine,
Okay.
like
Every-
most married couples.
Everything's fair, right?
Yep.
Okay. And at that point, when you went in to see Tammy, did you observe anything unusual?
Um, well, earlier in the day, she was exhausted, but
All right,
she
now,
seemed more
I want you to
exhausted.
stop there.
Okay.
When you said
Hold on.
earlier in the day,
There is a lot of talking over the top of each other, and I know this is difficult for the court reporter, so both Mr. Pryor and the witness, Mr. Murray, please just talk one at a time. Thank
Okay.
you.
and Joe, what I was getting at, as you had mentioned earlier in the day, you had mentioned something about her physical condition. About what time was that?
That was around 2, almost 3 o'clock when I went to go get um, the truck
And where did you go get the truck?
from the school.
And that was the same day that she was working on the book fair, is that correct?
Correct.
Did you happen to observe her lifting any boxes or anything unusual at that point?
I did.
What did you observe?
She was carrying around several scholastic school book boxes that are probably about this big, that were pretty heavy.
And you had mentioned that she looked, I don't want to put words in your mouth. How did you describe her appearance at that point?
She seemed exhausted and exasperated.
And exasperated for what reason?
She just didn't seem like she was feeling well.
Okay,
She seemed really worn out.
Objection, speculation, Your Honor.
Overruled.
okay. She seemed very worn out.
Correct.
She had been working lifting boxes all day.
Correct.
At some point later in the evening, did you have a chance to visit with her?
Yes, when I brought the keys back,
Okay, and what did you observe at that point?
she was sitting on the couch, and she seemed very exhausted, like I said from earlier, but then was coughing pretty hard.
Okay. Was there any indication that she appeared that she was sick or that she was having any other symptoms?
No,
Okay. And at that point, was Chad there as well?
yes,
And where was he sitting?
he was sitting. So you come in the front door, and then over here's they had the couches kind of set like this, and then right behind the couch were their computer desks, and he was sitting at the computer desk.
And and I almost did it again. When you're describing Tammy on the couch, what was her positioning on the couch? Was she spread out or was she sitting up?
She was sitting up.
Okay. But was it very clear to you that obviously she was in some form of distress?
It appeared that she was sick and that she wasn't feeling well.
Okay. On the next day, she passed in the night. Did you have an occasion to go over to the house?
I did. I was actually getting ready to go to work that next morning because I worked on Saturdays, the morning shift. And I was getting ready to go to work and I saw a deputy vehicle out front. And I couldn't see Garth's vehicle. And at first I was worried that maybe he hadn't shown up home from work that night. And I thought something had happened to him. So then I went back in the house again and had notified Emma. She called Tammy, and of course Tammy didn't answer. She called Chad, and Chad didn't answer. She called Garth, and Garth didn't answer. And finally, we were walking getting ready to walk across the street to their house. And then a deputy and Garth met us and told us what had happened.
Okay. And at some point, how would you describe Garth's reaction?
Very shaken up.
Okay. Did you have an occasion to observe Chad at that point?
I did.
And how would you describe Chad's reaction at that point?
I had never seen him the way I'd seen him that night or that morning, sorry. Very just, he was wandering aimlessly, and just, he kept holding his head like this and he kept asking, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And I've never seen him in that state before.
Would you describe that as being distraught,
Yes.
upset,
Yes.
shock?
Yes.
Did it appear that that was genuine to you?
Yes.
I want to step away at some point. Well, before I do, were you present when there was a discussion about whether or not to get an autopsy on Tammy Daybell?
I was.
And what did you observe in that regard?
Objection calls for hearsay, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Okay. At any time, did Chad Daybell request that nobody do an autopsy on his wife?
No.
Objection calls for hearsay, Your Honor.
It's not timely overruled.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit about the Daybell property in general, okay?
Okay.
You're familiar with the property.
Yes.
If you're going on the front of the house, which would be Salem Highway, which runs past your house as well, correct?
Right.
Your kitty corner, but southwest?
Correct.
Okay, I got it right. But how far of a distance are you from Chad's house?
Oh, I couldn't give a definitive answer, but it's, I mean, their house is closer to the front lot as is ours.
Okay. And then across the street, directly across the street on Salem Highway was another home, and do you know who was living there at that time?
Yes.
Who was that?
Matt and Regan Price.
Okay, and did you have an occasion to socialize or get to know them a little bit?
Yes.
Did you have an occasion to talk about animal problems, raccoon problems during that particular summer?
Yes.
And how often did that take place?
It was, I don't know exactly how often, but I know that there was a lot of problems with there being issues with raccoons, is what we believed it to be, that were getting into the animal feed bins. And so Matt Price had offered to let us use a trap to catch them.
Okay. And on occasion, there were actually raccoons that were trapped and caught. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit about the rest of the house and the physical, some of the physical attributes of the house. There's a particular red shed on the property. Is that right?
Correct.
And you had an occasion to borrow tools. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. You actually, how I learned this is you borrow tools from Matt Price as well, correct?
Correct.
And you sort of had a neighborhood understanding.
Objection, counsel's testifying, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Did you have some sort of an understanding in the neighborhood about the use of each other's tools?
Yes, anytime I didn't have a tool that I needed for yard work, I'd either ask Matt Price or my mother and father-in-law.
Okay. And in regards to the red shed, was that something you required a key to get into?
No.
How would you describe access to the red shed?
So it was on the west end of it. There's a garage door. Simply you turn the handle and pull up the door.
Okay. Was that ever locked?
No.
Was it ever at times when it was left open for longer extended periods of time?
Yes.
Was that unusual for the door to be down, or was it more usual for the door to be opened?
It was more so down, but but it was never locked.
Okay. So someone could get access.
Yep. And on the east side of it, there's another door that also was easy to access.
Right. And that was never locked?
Nope.
Okay. In relation to the house, how close is that red shed?
Ooh, maybe. I don't know. That would be really hard for me to describe it.
Would it be the distance from the back of that wall to where I'm standing right here?
Maybe a little bit further, but not much more.
Someone had walked to the back of the red shed. Could they be seen from the front of the house?
If they walked where?
If someone was standing in front of the front yard of the house, or excuse me, let's strike that. Let's start all over again. If someone was back in the red shed and someone else was standing in front of the house, would there be a visual way to see that they were in the red shed
On the very back
Salem
end
Road.
of it?
from Salem Road? Yeah.
No,
So it wasn't visibly able to see if someone was back there.
no.
In addition, are there two driveways on the Daybell property?
There are.
Okay, there's a short driveway, and where would you describe that one being?
It is on the northeast or northwest side of the lot.
So would that be in front of the house?
Correct.
Would that be more aptly described as the short driveway?
Correct.
And then on behind the house, there's a longer driveway, is that right?
Correct.
And that's a much longer driveway.
Yes.
Do you know whether or not from that long driveway behind the house, there could be access out to the field?
There are 2 points of access from that point.
Okay, and what are the 2 points of access from the long driveway?
Directly from the long driveway heading north, there's 2 cattle gates that open like this. And then to the east, there's another set of cattle gates.
So it would not be impossible for a vehicle off of the long driveway to drive back into the pasture, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Are you aware of where the bodies of J.J. Vallow and Tylee Ryan were found?
Yes.
Where were they found?
One was in the JJ was found in the back part of the property closer to the pond. And then Tylee was found to the south of that.
Okay, and would access be available through that gate off of the long driveway to those locations?
Yes.
And if someone were to use that back gate and drive down the long driveway, are they necessarily visible from the main road, Salem Highway?
While driving to there?
No, if someone were parked on front of the house on Salem Highway, would they be visible to that back gate? Observing anybody?
No.
It's a spot where you wouldn't be visible, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. In regards to the property, I have a note here that talks about officers driving by your house and Mr. Daybell's house quite regularly. Do you recall that?
Yes. Leading up to and even after Chad was arrested, I would frequently see Detective Hermosillo in his detective vehicle driving up and down our property. I mean, not our property, but up and down the 200 North Road
And when you say frequently, what would you describe as frequently?
several times a week.
Now, I want to talk to you about a sponsored 5K race. And that was in September of 2019. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
Okay, what do you recall about that? What was the purpose in the sponsorship?
So I had put on a race for an organization called Operation Underground Railroad. And I was the lead organizer of it. And it was to help children who were being trafficked to be able to be rescued.
Okay. And at that point, you put on this 5K event, is that correct?
Correct.
And you were you responsible for reviewing and maintaining the list of people who signed up to run the race?
I was.
Okay. And your mother-in-law at the time, Tammy Daybell, was involved to some extent. Is that correct?
Correct. Her and Chad's book publishing company actually sponsored the race, and Tammy was a volunteer in the race.
Okay. When you say a volunteer in the race, does that mean that Tammy ran the race?
No,
Did you ever see Tammy cross the finish line in a workout clothes to suggest she ran the race?
absolutely not.
Do you recall what Tammy was wearing on that day when she was involved in helping with the race?
Jeans and a t-shirt that said volunteer.
Okay. And you had a list also of who all the volunteers were, correct?
Yes,
And you were overseeing and supervising that race, is that correct?
that is correct.
Okay. Now, there is some discussion about, in early 2020, about you attending Sunday school, LDS Sunday school. Do you recall that?
Yes,
Was that your habit to go to Sunday school every Sunday as part of your LDS faith?
yes,
Okay. And there was some issue about a lesson Matt Daybell was giving at that particular time?
yes. There was a lesson that he had given about how his brother.
The relevance, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Okay. And at some point, did you gain, at least from your perspective, did you get a sense that people were judging the facts of what was going on with Chad?
Yes.
And what did you base that on?
The setting of in the Sunday school, it was pretty clear. A lot of dirty looks. And then on Facebook, the deputy prosecuting attorney for Fremont County at the time had made a pretty nasty post about it.
Okay, and you read that post.
I did.
So in other words, aside from also the church making comments, it was your impression that at least one government official was also making comments.
Correct.
Okay. I want to change gears a little bit, okay? If that's okay with you. I want to talk to you about your mom and dad.
Okay.
And that's Charlene and Joe, is that right?
Ed or Edward.
You're Joe. Charlene and Ed, excuse me. Were you familiar with some sort of competition between Tammy and your mom and dad?
Yes, there was a Fitbit competition that they were engaged in. And it was regarding the amount of steps that they would get each day.
Okay. And your father was competitive, would that be fair?
Absolutely.
And would you describe Tammy as being competitive?
Yes.
There was some testimony previously about Tammy doing something with her wrist or leg in regards to the Fitbit. Did you ever observe that?
Yes.
Okay, was there any sort of a family joke about Tammy's use of that Fitbit in that way?
Yes.
Who was in on that joke?
Emma and her siblings, and even Tammy would recognize that she was doing it for that purpose.
To win.
To win, yep.
And you said the family was in on this joke. What about Ed and Charlene? Were they in on this joke?
They didn't know that she was doing it at the time, that she
Okay.
was just moving her wrist like this.
Competing against your father.
Yep.
It was important to her, from your perspective, what you observed, to beat your father in this Fitbit competition. Is that right?
Yes, because at that time, my dad had begun to lose weight and was beginning to run and exercise a lot. And so it was very important for him to win. And I sensed a bit of jealousy from, because it wasn't just my dad, my mom as well, but that was doing really well. And I had sensed a bit of jealousy, and even had recognized that Tammy was a bit jealous to see that.
Okay. So there was some maybe doing some additional things to increase your mileage. Would that be fair?
Yep.
Judge, I don't have anything else at this point. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Counsel, let me have a brief sidebar if I could. All right, thank you, counsel, for the sidebar. We were just discussing scheduling with this particular witness. I don't think it would be possible for the state to conclude their cross and then any redirect by the time we had today. And so we are going to go ahead and recess for the afternoon at this time. We'll come back on in the morning at our regular time at 8:30 with additional testimony. At this time, Mr. Murray, I'll advise you, you'll remain under oath for your testimony continuing tomorrow. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen of the courtroom, for complying with the conduct order while you've been here today. I'll also advise the jurors, please follow the court's admonishing instruction as we conclude for the day. Do not discuss any evidence of the case amongst yourselves or with anyone else. Please don't do anything to research this case while you're on break, and don't do anything if you see media reporting of the case. Try to divert from that so you can remain impartial and consider the case only on the evidence that's been presented here in court. So thank you for your attentiveness today. We will continue again with further testimony in the morning, and we'll be in recess.
All right, please.